He sat there, in the corner of a quiet diner, staring blankly into the bottom of his coffee cup as if it held some kind of answer he'd been missing for years. His hands trembled not from cold, but from everything else that had been weighing on him: time, age, regret, and something deeper, something no one talks about. But every man over 50 knows intimately. It wasn't just the body changing, it was the silence of desire, the fading spark, the quiet betrayal of his own manhood. His name was Richard, 67 years old, retired mechanic, 2 kids, divorced, no longer chasing life, more like surviving it. The kind of man who used to fix engines with his bare hands but now couldn't even fix the emptiness he felt inside. When he woke up every morning, that hollow space between his chest and his stomach, where purpose used to live, where he used to feel like a man, it wasn't about sex. Not really. It was about what sex represented. His vitality, his confidence, his identity as a man. Now, even the morning erections, those old faithful signs of life, were gone. Some days he thought it was just the stress. Other days he blamed his back. But deep down, he knew it was something else. Something quietly slipping away, while no one was watching, and that's when he met Elias. Elias didn't look like someone who carried secrets. He was just an old man sitting on a park bench feeding birds. 83 years old, thin, soft-spoken, but with eyes that held decades of storms, and a voice like gravel and honey. Richard wouldn't have talked to him if his car hadn't broken down. Right near that park? Funny how life knows exactly where to put you when you're at your breaking point. Life's not over, Elias said without being asked. But it feels that way, doesn't it? Richard blinked. Excuse me, you've got that look, the old man smiled. The look of a man who thinks he's done being a man. And just like that, the wall cracked. What followed wasn't a conversation, it was a confession. Richard opened up about the fatigue, the shame, the way he avoided mirrors lately, how he stopped trying with women, how he told his doctor once and was handed a prescription he never filled, how no one warned him that being alive doesn't mean you feel alive. Elias just nodded, his gaze steady. And then, in that quiet voice, he said something Richard would never forget. It's not your fault, but it is your responsibility. That night, Richard couldn't sleep. Not because he was restless, but because, for the first time in years, something inside him had stirred. Something like hope. He met Elias again the next morning and the morning after that. Until finally, the old man shared the secret that changed everything. It wasn't a pill. It wasn't a workout. It wasn't some biohacking miracle. It was awareness. Most men, Elias explained, start dying when they stop noticing their body. They think decline is normal, but what's normal isn't always natural. He spoke of simple things no doctor ever told Richard, like how a man's blood flow determines far more than just erections, that circulation is life, that testosterone doesn't vanish, gets blocked, suffocated by stress, bad food, inactivity, and the silent poison of shame. Elias talked about posture, about breathing, about a forgotten point on the body every man has but most never activate. You've been walking around disconnected from yourself, Elias said, but you can reconnect. Richard thought it was nonsense, until he tried it. That morning, Elias guided him through a ritual. Nothing mystical, no incense or mantras. Just 5 minutes of pressing a point just below the belly button, breathing deep into it while standing with feet rooted like a tree. It felt stupid, until it didn't. Something shifted. Richard couldn't explain it. But for the first time in years, he felt blood move not just in his body, but in his soul. A slow, warm rising, not an erection, not yet, but the memory of it. You're awakening, Elias whispered. This is just the beginning. Richard went home and cried, not because he was sad, but because he realized how numb he'd been. The next day, he changed his breakfast. Not a diet, just a few intentional swaps, good fats instead of sugar, warm water with lemon instead of black coffee. He stopped reading the news in the morning and started writing in a notebook one thing he wanted to feel that day, and then, on the 5th day it happened, he woke up with morning wood. He laughed like a boy, like someone who'd been given back a part of himself he didn't know he could reclaim. He didn't even call Elias that day. He just walked to the mirror, looked at his face and said aloud, "I'm still in here." He hadn't said that in years. That week, everything changed. His voice sounded different. His back felt straighter. His eyes stopped looking down in public. He started shaving again, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. The spark was back, not because of magic, but because of presence. Elias gave him something no doctor, no ad, no article ever did: permission to believe again. And so Richard made a vow that he would never let another man over 50 feel alone in this. That he would share what he learned at what Elias taught him, not as a miracle, but as a reminder: you are not broken. You are simply waiting to remember who you are. And if you're reading this right now, Maybe you needed that reminder too. He kept returning to the park bench, not to find Elias but to find himself. Something about that place felt like sacred ground. Richard didn't know if it was the crisp morning air, the soft rustle of leaves under his feet, or the invisible energy Elias had left behind. But something called him back, day after day. On the third morning, Elias was gone. In his place, there was a folded piece of paper, slightly damp from the morning dew, resting right where the old man used to sit. Richard hesitated, as if opening. It would change something in him forever, and maybe it did. The message inside was simple. It read, "You've felt it. Now pass it forward. You're not alone. There was no address, no instructions. Just those words." Richard stared at them, letting them sink into his bones. The wind picked up slightly, brushing past his face like a whisper. It felt like a blessing. Or a challenge. Either way, it stirred something in him that had long been dormant. That's why he started speaking. Not out loud, not right away, but through gestures. Through eye contact with other men who looked like he used to, tired, hollow, fading. He saw them everywhere now, on buses, in diners, at the pharmacy, walking their dogs. Men whose shoulders slumped under invisible weight. Men who laughed too hard at jokes to hide the sadness. Men who stopped making eye contact with themselves and mirrors. And now, if you're here reading this, then maybe you're one of them too. Maybe, just like Richard, you've been wondering what happened to you. Not just your body, but your desire, your fire, your reason. Maybe you've started avoiding intimacy, not because you don't want it, but because you're afraid of the disappointment, the silence, the guilt, the way your partner looks at you with confusion or pity. Or maybe you're alone and the idea of starting over feels impossible. Let me tell you something you need to hear. You are not broken, you are not done. You are not invisible. There are thousands of men just like you waiting in silence, pretending everything's fine, blaming the calendar for something that isn't about age. It's about neglect, not from the world, from yourself. Years of putting everyone else first. Years of surviving instead of living. Years of ignoring the signals your body has been sending because you thought it was too late. Elias had told Richard something that refused to leave him. Most men stop being men not when their body changes, but when they stop noticing. That line haunted him. And maybe it haunts you too. So I'll ask you something, not as a stranger, but as another man. When was the last time you felt proud of yourself? Not for something you achieved, but for how you felt inside your skin. When did you last walk with a sense of weight in your step? Not from pain, but from presence. When did you last wake up with the kind of energy that made you want to face the world instead of hide from it? If you've forgotten that feeling, then this is your moment to reclaim it. Richard began with the smallest rituals. He didn't call them habits. Habits are mechanical. Rituals are sacred. Every morning before reaching for his phone, before brushing his teeth, he placed both feet on the ground, sat at the edge of the bed, and pressed his fingers just below his navel. The same spot Elias had shown him. He took 5 slow breaths. Not for oxygen, for remembrance. And with each breath, he said to himself, I'm still here. You can do that too, right now. Just pause. Put your hand on your belly or your chest, or wherever you feel emptiest. Breathe into it slowly, deeply. Let your body know you're listening. Let your spirit know you haven't given up. And if this moment stirred anything in you, if even a small part of you feels seen, then let others know. Leave a comment, a single sentence. I'm still here. You'd be surprised how powerful those words can be, not just for you, but for the man who reads them and realizes he's not alone. This isn't a club. It's not therapy. It's remembrance of who you are, of what you carry, of what you deserve to feel again. This channel, this space, this message, it's a lighthouse. Not everyone sees it, but those who do, they're ready. If you're ready to join us, click subscribe. Not for updates for yourself, for your future self, for the man who still lives in your bones, under the aches, behind the fatigue, beneath the disappointment. Richard began to write again. Nothing poetic, just reflections. What he felt when he woke up, what he wanted to remember, what he was afraid to forget. He started walking differently, eating differently. Not because someone told him to, but because his body asked him to. He began saying no to things that drained him, and yes to things that made his hands shake with excitement. He even went on a date. Not because he needed someone, but because he wanted to share his new sense of aliveness. And she noticed not just the physical shift, but the glow, the steadiness. The man who looked her in the eyes without shame. He hadn't used pills. He hadn't paid for programs. He had returned to his own presence. That was the medicine. That was the miracle. That was the hidden knowledge no one talks about because it can't be sold. It can only be felt. Now it's your turn. You don't need to move mountains today. You just need to whisper to yourself, I'm still here. Then do one thing that honors that truth. Walk outside barefoot, Breathe slowly. Cook something with your hands. Light a candle in silence. Call someone you miss. Or do nothing at all. Just sit with your heartbeat. That's the beginning. That's how Richard started. That's how all of us start, and that's how the fire returns. He didn't expect the messages to come. Not at first. Richard had shared his experience online the way a man might shout into a canyon, expecting only his own echo. But the silence didn't echo back. Instead, it answered, slowly, quietly, then, all at once. The first was from a man named James, 62, from Ohio. He wrote, "I did what you said. The breathing, the pressure point, the breakfast. I didn't feel anything for the first 2 days. But on the third, I cried. Not because anything changed, but because I realized I had stopped hoping." Then came Marcus, 58, from Arizona. "I've been married 32 years. My wife thinks I'm cheating. I'm not. I just don't feel like a man anymore. I started this week. Something's stirring. I can't name it yet, but it's there." Each message hit Richard like a warm punch to the gut. Real men behind real screens, pouring out truths they'd never said out loud before. Truths that were always there, hiding beneath the noise of masculinity, bravado, pride, and shame. Men saying things they thought only they felt. And suddenly, there was a thread connecting them. A thread made of vulnerability, of hope, of the memory of who they used to be and who they could be again. One message simply read, "My father killed himself at 74. I'm 56 now, and I was heading the same way. But today I said I'm still here out loud, and it hit different." It wasn't therapy, it wasn't science, but it was something ancient, something sacred. A brotherhood formed not by words, but by wounds and healing. Together, one message said, "My grandson asked me why I was always tired. I didn't know what to say, but now I have an answer. I told him, because I forgot how to take care of myself. But I'm learning again. There is something powerful in admitting that we've forgotten. Not because it means we're weak, but because it means we're human." And Richard began to realize this wasn't just about his own healing. This was about reclaiming something for all of them, for every man who had been slowly slipping into silence, thinking it was normal. So he started researching, not on forums or in ads selling miracles, but in studies buried beneath pharmaceutical noise. He learned about the truth of testosterone not as a magic hormone, but as a communicator. That it doesn't just vanish with age, but gets suppressed by modern life, chronic stress, inflammation, poor circulation, shallow breathing, lack of sunlight, nutrient deficiencies, shame. Yes, even shame affects it, because the body listens to emotion, and the more a man believes he is no longer a man, the more his body obeys. He read about nitric oxide, the molecule responsible for blood flow, erections, brain clarity, and even heart health, and how its production drops not only with age, but with stillness, with sitting too long, with hiding, with shrinking. He read that movement, laughter, purpose, even kissing, yes, even long, intentional kissing increased nitric oxide levels. That pleasure was not a reward for being healthy, but a path to it. That the male body was designed for pleasure, not punishment. But most men were treating themselves like machines that had failed. Richard took this knowledge not as data, but as liberation. And he began sharing it, not as a teacher, but as a witness. He told them, "This is what I learned. Your morning coffee is depleting your minerals. Your phone light at midnight is messing with your melatonin. Your guilt is raising your cortisol. And your lack of touch is starving your dopamine. You don't need pills, you need touch. You need breath. You need to put your bare feet in grass and look at the damn sky again." And men listened. One wrote, "I started hugging my wife again, not for sex, just to feel her heart next to mine. I hadn't done that in years." We both cried. Another said, "I bought a jump rope. I only managed 10 seconds, but I felt my heart beat like it hadn't in years." Another, "I forgave myself today. It wasn't linear." Some men felt worse before they felt better. Some skipped days. Some gave up and came back. But something had begun. Something irreversible. Richard remembered something Elias once said, almost in passing, "It's not about being young again. It's about being whole again." That line became his prayer. Every breath, every ritual, every comment replied to online. Wholeness, not performance, not aesthetics, not domination, just presence. And still, there were skeptics. Men who said, "This sounds like nonsense." Men who demanded hard science, numbers, charts. Richard welcomed them too. He said, "That's okay. Start with a breath. Start with putting your hand on your chest and saying, 'I'm still here.' If it feels stupid, do it again tomorrow. See what happens." Some came back. Some didn't. But the door stayed open. And the men who stayed, who breathed, who cried, who moved, who remembered, they began to change. They began to live. Richard hosted his first circle. Not a seminar, Not a workshop. Just a circle. 6 chairs. 5 men showed up. All over 51 had lost his wife. One hadn't spoken to his son in years. One hadn't felt sexual desire in over a decade. They didn't introduce themselves with titles or resumes. They just said their names. And one thing they missed about themselves: I miss how I used to laugh without looking around first. I miss the way I felt after building something with my hands. I miss being touched, not sexually, just touched. The silence that followed was not awkward. It was sacred. And Richard simply said, "Me too." That was the beginning of everything. They talked about what they ate, how they slept, what they feared, what they hoped, and one by one the shame began to peel off like old skin, not by force, but by breath, by story, by being seen. And so here you are reading this, still breathing, still wondering, still hoping there's more. There is. It begins now. They kept meeting once a week, then twice. The circle grew. No invitations, no advertising, just word of mouth and quiet trust. Richard never called it a group or a movement. He didn't call it anything at all. He said it's just men sitting together, remembering how to feel. And it was enough. The change was subtle at first. Posture, breath, eye contact, hands less fidgety, silence less awkward. A shift from apologizing to acknowledging. One man, Samuel, 63, said he hadn't touched his own body with care in years. He showered fast, dried even faster, avoided mirrors, avoided touch, even from himself. Not because he was ashamed of aging, but because he had disconnected completely. That week, he took an hour-long bath with candlelight. Not for pleasure, for presence, he cried. Then he laughed. He said he felt like a man with a body again, not a ghost living in a machine. Another man, Luis, 59, began doing something he hadn't done in decades. He started dancing alone in his kitchen. He told the circle, "I didn't even play music. I just heard something inside me, a rhythm, and I followed it." His wife walked in, saw him, and didn't laugh. She joined him. They didn't speak. They just danced. That night, for the first time in almost a year, they made love. Not out of duty, not out of performance, out of reconnection. Luis said he didn't even think about erections. He thought about breath and trust and warmth, and his body followed. Gently, proudly, fully. The stories multiplied. Some men found strength in cooking again. Others in walking barefoot on the earth. One man simply stood every morning facing the rising sun, arms wide, whispering thank you, not to a god, not to anything specific, just to life. And life in return came back to them, slowly, tenderly, sometimes with fire, sometimes with silence. Richard began noticing changes in himself, too. His skin looked clearer, his belly softer but not bloated, his eyes steadier. He no longer walked with his head down. He looked people in the eye, not to dominate, but to connect. He noticed women looking back at him, not because he was trying, but because he had stopped trying to hide. He remembered how Elias once said, "A man who is truly present doesn't need to prove anything. He becomes magnetic, even in silence." And he was right. People at the store smiled at him more. Teenagers asked him for directions. Strangers struck up conversations. Not because he wore new clothes or dyed his hair, but because he radiated something rare in older men. Peace. That quiet, unapologetic masculine peace that doesn't chase approval but welcomes connection. Richard wasn't special. He kept reminding the others of this. He hadn't figured life out. He hadn't hacked biology. He hadn't mastered discipline. He had simply stopped abandoning himself. Every morning he returned to his rituals, not because he had to, but because they brought him home. And home was not a place. It was a sensation, a pulse in the chest, a warmth in the gut, a steadiness in the eyes. He began documenting these rituals, quietly, not to teach, just to remember. The list was short. Breathe deeply, slowly, before anything else. Touch the body with intention, not criticism. Eat like your body deserves to feel alive. Move, stretch, dance, lift, walk. Speak kindly to the mirror. Thank your body for carrying you this far. Let go of shame like shedding old skin. That was it. No supplements. No magic. No guru talk. Just returning again and again to the breath, to the self, to the body. More men joined. They came with different stories: divorce, prostate cancer, emotional numbness, erectile issues, addiction, loneliness, but they all came with the same hunger, not for sex, not even for power, for presence, for the feeling of being a man without apology, without pretense, without armor. One man, Reggie, 65, sat quietly for weeks before saying a word. Then one night he looked up and said, "I haven't told anyone this, but I thought about ending it last year. The holidays were too quiet. I thought no one would notice." The room fell silent. Not out of shock, out of respect. And one by one, every man in the room nodded. Not with pity, with understanding, because they had all been there, or close, or just one thought away. Reggie continued. Then I saw a video, just a man breathing, saying I'm still here. I thought it was stupid, but I watched it again and again, and something cracked. I cried harder than I ever have. And I'm still here. That became a mantra in the circle. A knowing glance, a hand on the shoulder. I'm still here. It meant everything. Richard wrote those words on a slip of paper and tucked them into his wallet. He looked at them every time he doubted himself. Every time the old voices returned to old, too late, too soft, too tired. He read the words, pressed his fingers to the spot Elias had shown him, and breathed. And every time he felt the answer in his body, you are not too late. You are only just now beginning, and so are you. If this story has found you, it's because you are ready, not for information, but for remembrance, not for a fix, but for a return. You do not need to be perfect. You do not need to perform. You only need to show up for yourself every morning, even for 5 minutes. Put your feet on the floor, touch your belly, breathe, say the words. Let your body respond, not because it should, because it can. Because it wants to, because you've ignored it long enough. And when you feel that first flicker, whether it's a tear, an erection, a smile, or a deep breath that feels like coming home, welcome it. That's you. That's life. That's manhood. Still here? He never found Elias again, not in the park, not on the street, not online. It was as if he had appeared only to deliver the message and then vanished, like a spirit of old wisdom, fading back into the fabric of the world. And that was okay. Richard didn't need to find him anymore, because everything Elias had given him was now etched into his bones, his breath, his steps, his voice. Richard had become the message, and now he was the one men came to find. The circle was now more than 10, then 20, then more, but they never stopped sitting in silence first. No introductions, just breathing. Men of all shapes, colors, stories, some in suits, some in overalls, some divorced, some grieving, some in recovery, some simply curious, but all of them searching for the same thing. The feeling of coming back home to themselves. And that feeling, it wasn't in a supplement. It wasn't in a workout plan. It wasn't even in the rituals, as sacred as they had become. It was in the choice. The moment a man chooses to stop abandoning himself, to stop numbing, to stop pretending, to stop apologizing for wanting to feel alive again, for wanting to be touched, held, seen, desired, strong, soft, powerful, whole, that choice changes everything. It did for Richard. He was no longer the man who sat alone in diners, blaming time for what his silence had allowed. He was now the man who walked slowly, who listened deeply, who held space for others. The man whose eyes said, I see you, without ever needing to speak. The man whose body was no longer a battlefield, but a sacred home. The man whose morning rituals weren't chores, but acts of love. He still had bad days. There were mornings. When he forgot, when he rushed, when the old voices returned, like ghosts in the hallway. But now, he knew what to do. He didn't fight them. He breathed through them. He whispered the words, I'm still here. And his body listened. Again and again. Until the voices faded. He wasn't chasing youth anymore. He was embodying presence, and that presence attracted more than attention. It attracted truth. His relationship with his grown children deepened. His friendships grew richer. Women noticed him not for what he offered, but for who he had become. He carried no bitterness, no desperation, no performance. Just being. And through it all, the circle kept growing. Not with noise, not with banners or campaigns, but with the sacred whisper between men who had walked the edge of forgetting and returned. Men who no longer saw erections as symbols of youth, but as signals of aliveness. Not performance, but connection. Not power, but flow. Not pressure, but presence. One night, around the fire, a man named Anthony, 66, looked up and said, I never realized how long I was trying to disappear. The flames cracked. No one spoke. He continued, I was waiting to be noticed. Waiting for someone to come knock on my door and remind me that I mattered. But now I see. It was always me. I had to knock. And that was it. The knock, the choice, the permission. That's what this is right now. You, reading these words, breathing through whatever you're feeling, this is your knock. This is your permission. This is the invitation you've been waiting for. No, one is coming to save you, because you are not broken. You don't need saving. You need remembering. Remembering that your body is still listening, that your breath still holds power, that your hands still want to build, that your heart still wants to love, that your desire isn't shameful, it's sacred, that your softness isn't weakness, it's wisdom, that your strength doesn't come from what you can lift, but from what you can hold. quietly, tenderly, fully. You are still a man, not because of your testosterone, not because of your performance, but because of your presence. And presence can be rebuilt, one breath at a time. So here's what you do now. Stand up. Yes, now, if you can. Place your feet firmly on the ground, close your eyes, place one hand on your belly, the other on your heart, and breathe. Slow, deep. Say the words loud, even if it feels strange. Say, I'm still here. Again, I'm still here. That's not weakness. That's your declaration. Now listen to your breath, to your pulse, to your memories, to the parts of you buried under years of stress and sacrifice. They're still alive now. Take that phone, not to scroll, not to escape, but to join. Comment something simple, one word here. Or say what you felt reading this. Because somewhere another man is scrolling, hiding, aching, and your voice will reach him. You will be the knock on his door, and he will answer and subscribe. Not because it's a channel, because it's a sanctuary. A place where your journey continues, where the breath is sacred, where manhood is reclaimed not with force, but with grace. You still have it in you, the fire, the touch, the clarity, the hunger, the softness, the power, all of it. And if you show up tomorrow and the next day and the next, not perfectly, just presently, then one day someone will ask you what changed, and you'll smile, and you'll say, I remembered who I was, and I never left again. So now, man to man, I ask you only this. Don't go back to sleep. Your life is waiting, and you are still here.